Hey guys, the main point of this module, Module 3, is to introduce really how to style your content. So we talked in Module 1 about what is web design and how have we gotten to where we're currently at, what kind of iteration of design are we in, and then in Module 2 we talked about HTML and what it does, and now we're going to talk about CSS. And so a lot of the things in this module and the next module are going to be putting these things together in meaningful ways so that your web design can grow in leaps and bounds really quickly just with a few simple commands. So let's start off by defining CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It is, at its most basic thing, a formatting language that is used to design pages. So you can enhance particular text, you can change the layout, you can move entire chunks of content around simply with CSS. It provides site-wide consistency, so every page on your site will have the same design characteristics. That makes it to where you're not jumping between layouts and different kind of navigation systems and all of that. And ultimately that is because what you write in your HTML is merely bare bones. It is just what you want to show up, not how you want it to show up. And so HTML really is just the scaffolding on which CSS builds the actual structure. And so CSS, some might say, adds design flair. It tells the browser how to display page elements, where to display page elements, and it ultimately makes the pages prettier. And it makes them way easier to read because you're able to space things out. It's not just a big, long list of text, but it's actually a design that you create using this system. And so with CSS, there's some small rules. First off, the behaviors are inherited. So if you have elements that are nested within other elements, whatever, let's say you have element 1 and element 2, and element 2 is nested within element 1. Okay, anything that you do to element 1 will also happen to element 2. Think of them as parents. That's the first rule. The second rule is that the specificity determines which rule is applied if there's a conflict. So there might be a case where you have everything within the body tag is Helvetica, and then you say, oh yeah, but also everything that's within the paragraph tag is going to be Arial. So there are certainly going to be paragraph tags within your body tag, right? But that's a conflict. Should it be Helvetica or should it be Arial? Well, everything in the body tag is going to be Helvetica except for where you specifically said the paragraph tag is Arial, and so that will change it. The more specific rule gets used. And so if there still is a tie, the rule that comes later in the document, so we're going to look at some CSS code here in a second, and you're going to see that it goes in blocks of text. And so the block that is written last breaks the tie. If there's, let's say that you declared body to be Helvetica up at the very top, and then you declared body to also be Arial down at the bottom. Well, it's going to go with your most recent thing. So the thing at the bottom is the thing it's going to go with. There are two types of style sheets. Early on in this class, we are going to use the first kind here, the internal or embedded style sheet, and then later on, starting pretty much at the end of the next module, we're going to start just using external style sheets. So an internal style sheet means that the style is actually written in the .html page. It's not a separate file. This is what we did, if you remember, on your hello world.html page. This was an internal or an embedded style sheet. It was already written in the head of the page. It only applied to a single page. So if you had a bunch of other pages in your site, you would have to either rewrite that script every single time, or you would use the second kind here, the external style sheet. The external style sheet is a separate file. So you might have index.html, but then you're going to have style.css. And that style.css file can be called by multiple different pages. So your index, maybe you have a contact page, maybe you have a our products page, whatever. All of those can call a singular file. And that separate file contains no HTML content. So all it is a style guide. Okay? So CSS, what does it actually do? Well, it can define your appearance of several things: your font size, your color, your layout, what people can print. So if they go in their browser to file print, what can they print? How much of it can they print? This is particularly useful if you're trying to create a photography website and you don't want people to be able to rip off your images. And all of this is done through rules. Okay, so rules have a very specific appearance, so let's talk about those. Rules are made up of selectors. So a selector basically names, hey, I want to style this element, and you will name it the same throughout the document. And then there's curly braces, so everything that is the rule for a particular element has to go within the same set of curly braces. And then within the curly braces, there's a thing called the declaration block. And basically, this describes the formatting that you're going to apply. And it is composed of two separate things. It is composed of the property and the value. Okay, so the property might be color, and the value might be red. Okay, and all of that declaration block is going to go between the curly braces, and let's say that the element in this case was body. Okay, so they all kind of work together. So the syntax of a rule looks something like this. So you have your H1, that would be your selector. Anything that's in parentheses here would not actually be there. So you would have H1, then a curly brace, and then color, colon, red. It's really important after every line of CSS code that you write a semicolon. So after every declaration, you have to put a semicolon. If you don't do this, it might work for a time, but it will eventually break. So you put a semicolon, and then you end your declaration block with a curly bracket. Okay, so in reality, it would look like this. Okay? Or if you're kind of OCD like me and you want it to be really well organized, it's going to look something like this. So every time I write CSS code, it's going to look something like, it's going to have the element, curly bracket, declaration block, curly bracket. And all of this is going to be spaced out like this every time. Okay, so these curly brackets, though, can contain more than one declaration block. So let's say that for all H1s, you wanted them to be colored red, and you wanted their background to be black. Well, you could do that all in one block instead of having to have H1 color red in the bracket, then H1 bracket, background black in the bracket. You can have just one big block of code. It's really, really helpful. It cleans it up a lot. So style rules can be created in a few different ways. First, they can be created internally. This is what we're going to do for this module, and that's what we've done in the past. However, going forward, this is not the way we're going to do it. We're going to locate all of our style in the head section of the HTML file, and it is going to be applied directly to an HTML element. Sometimes you can do this even in the body code. I would not suggest doing that. It is bound to get you messed up on what you changed. If anything, just leave it in the head section, and then whenever we get to how to create an external sheet, you'll just push it all to an external sheet. Okay, so it can be created internally. It can be done externally, which is what we're going to learn. So this is really the best way to do it. If you have a site, let's say, with 55 web pages, you have one style sheet. Instead of having 55 web pages where each of them has a little bit of a snippet of style code in the head tag. That might work okay until you try to do, let's say your company decided that it no longer wanted to use a particular font. Well, now you have to open up all 55 pages and change in every page that style tag. That would really, really stink. Whereas if you do this with an external sheet, you have one .css file that you need to go open, you make the change, your entire site looks different. That's really, really great. I compare it to using like themes in PowerPoint or WordPress, where you just go and you just push a button and your whole site looks different. Okay, so creating CSS is relatively easy. Well, what might you create it in? Well, you probably already know, given our development environments from Module 1. You can use Notepad, you can use TextEdit. I prefer, again, to use TextWrangler. These tend to work really, really well for our uses. In each case, you're going to have to actually manually write in the .css file extension. It's not that big of a deal. You'll figure it out the first time you mess it up. So let's say you wanted to create a style CSS file. You would name it style.css, and then you would move on with your life. Okay, so make sure you use the .css. It's a normal .txt. file format. The other thing that's really different about CSS from HTML is that comments work differently. So if you'll recall from our last module, we talked a lot about how comments work and how they're so useful, and then we said, hey, this is how you do it in HTML. Well, in CSS, it's totally different. It's a different call. So in HTML, if you'll remember, it was the alligator, if you want to call it that, exclamation point and then 2 hyphens to start it, and then to end it, it was 2 hyphens and then the little angled bracket. In CSS, it's just a slash and a star to start it, and a star and a slash to end it. So it's a lot easier in CSS. That's really helpful, though, because you're going to use a lot more comments in CSS. It's how you're going to break up your code, because you're going to have this big document, and you need to be able to quickly find everything that styles your text, or everything that styles, how large the elements of your page are going to be. Okay, so this is an example. So it's going to say, this is a CSS comment, blah, blah, blah. All of this would never show up on the site because it's within this comment tag. Okay, so what does it actually look like? Well, it's going to look something like this. So you have at the top of your file, you're going to have the @ symbol, and then CHRSET, and then in quotes, you're going to say UTF-8 in quotes. Make sure you put a semicolon. Basically what that says is, hey, we're going to use a normal character set to the computer. And then this is an example of what a CSS file might look like. So you might leave yourself a comment that says, hey, it seems like this color combo for the body will work. May want to think about blue instead. Okay, so if you look down here, they're using aqua. And so they're saying, hey, if aqua doesn't work, let's use blue. And then they're styling the body as their element. Then they have curly brackets open, and they close down here. And they're doing a few different things. First off, they have their background. So everything in the background is going to be aqua colored. They're going to color everything that's in the body font-wise. They're going to color it with this #000, and we're going to get into that more in the color theory lecture that is a part of this same module. They're going to use the font family of Palatino Linotype, and then if the computer doesn't have that, it's going to default to Palatino. If it doesn't have that, it's just going to pick a serif font. And then lastly, they're going to set all the font size to be 16 pixels. Okay? So after each one of those, you'll notice that they have a semicolon. Normally, I would want this to be on separate lines, but for the sake of fitting everything in this slide, I decided not to do that. So that's what it looks like. Okay, so if you were to have it in your head section, you would have your doc type like normal, your HTML language like normal, and then if you were going to link to an external site, you're going to have it say link space, that's a space right there, and then it's going to say REL, so relative, equals quotes style sheet. So you're telling it, hey, I'm about to link to a style sheet, and then you're going to give it the reference. This href is, hey, here is a link reference, and that reference is rockinstyle.css. So now everything that was down here that would be appropriately styled by this CSS file will now have that applied to it. If you did not have this in here, nothing would happen. It would just show up without any styling at all. Okay, so there's 3 different style types really within CSS. There's the class, there's the ID, and there's the tag. Okay, a class is a grouping of elements that might all be styled the same despite being in different locations on the same page. Okay, so you might want, all of the images in a gallery. So you have a gallery that's maybe 3 columns by 3 rows. So you have 9 images. You might want all of those to have the same styling done to them without having to name each one an individual thing. Well, you can use a class, and that's perfect. So the way you declare a class is that you put a period before the name in the CSS. And the way I remember that is that you have class periods back in school if you were in high school or junior high. And so you put a period before a class, and then you say the name of the class, and then you can style it just like normal. Now when you come down here, you could say class equals, and then see how it's in quotes, and you said company. So this name matches this name. Now that everything that's within this class tag, so that we get it right, is going to be given this style. Okay? So that's a class. An ID is a little bit more specific. So a class is a set of elements. An ID is a specific, unique element. So you might say, hey, here's an ID that I'm going to call, the gallery slideshow or whatever, and it has a specific, unique thing about it. It is one element. It is not a group of elements. Okay, and so the way you style an ID is that you use a hashtag. Okay, so you say hashtag copyright, and then you say your declaration block, that in this case is text align center. Okay, so then everything that is within this paragraph tag that has been given the ID of copyright, so here they say copyright, we get it right, 2013. Okay, everything that's within that is going to be centered. Okay. Lastly, there's tags. It applies to every tag of one type. So instead of grouping various things together into a class or styling a really specific thing, you can just say, hey, every header tag, do this. Or all the paragraph tags, do this. So in this case, we say H1, and then we say, hey, the color is this hashtag 903, and then why you should use my company. Whenever this shows up on the screen, it's going to be styled with this color. Okay? You can tell these types apart in just the same way that we were talking about how they're different. So a class gets a period, an ID gets a hashtag or a pound sign if you're pre-Twitter, and a tag, nothing precedes it. So if you just want to style all the H1s, you can just say H1. In body, there's the type of style that is the attribute, and the selector is a value. So if you want to go back to our attributes and values and elements and tags and everything from HTML, in this case, if you're going to say, hey, here's a specific span, which we're going to get into spans later, and it has the class of company, that is an attribute, and this is a value. So that if that helps you put it into HTML speak, there you go. If it doesn't, ignore it. Either way, basically what you're saying is, I want to name something that is a group of things called a class, and I want to name it company. And up in my HTML, I'm going to declare what I want it to do by saying dot company and then a declaration block of everything. Okay, I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions about CSS, please ask them now over email or come and find me in my office. If you don't get it at this step, it's going to be really hard going forward. So we need to make sure that everybody has a really solid foundation of this before we move too far down the line. All right, thanks. See you soon.